Beneath the sun-scorched island of Malta, there is a silence so dense that it feels like a living presence. It is a silence that has outlasted empires, swallowed entire belief systems, and buried a profound secret in the cold embrace of limestone. In 1902, a construction crew digging a cistern in the town of Paola felt the ground suddenly give way beneath their feet. What they uncovered was not a simple void, but a meticulously carved descent into a subterranean world that should not have existed. They had accidentally breached the threshold of the Ħal Saflieni Hypogeum, a labyrinthine necropolis carved from living rock over 5,000 years ago. As you first peer into that carved darkness, you are confronted immediately with a paradox that defies the standard narrative of prehistory. We are taught to imagine our earliest ancestors as primitive wanderers, grunting in the dirt, struggling merely to survive. Yet here, deep beneath the Maltese earth, a sophisticated society had sculpted architecture that rivals the complexity of a Gothic cathedral. The Hypogeum descends 3 stories into the bedrock, a negative space so perfectly engineered that it mimics above-ground temple facades. Spiral staircases, false windows, lintel doorways, and perfectly domed ceilings were not built by stacking stones, but by removing thousands of tons of rock with antler picks and obsidian blades. This was not a mine or a disorganized cave system. It was a temple of shadows, a resonance chamber for the dead, carved with a precision that modern engineers still struggle to fully comprehend. The mystery begins not with how they carved it, but with why a healthy, sun-loving society would dedicate centuries to worshiping in the suffocating dark. The upper level greets you with a sprawling, open chamber, but the air quickly grows heavy and damp as you descend into the middle level's maze of narrow passages. Here, the walls are smoothed to a glassy finish, stained a deep ochre by the red clay pigment of the island's soil, absorbing the faintest glimmer of artificial light. It is in this oppressive middle level, the heart of the labyrinth, where the true voice of the Hypogeum still whispers a challenge across millennia. Archaeologists soon realized they had not merely found a burial site for a few dozen individuals. The complex housed the disarticulated remains of over 7,000 people. The sheer volume of bones, piled in a sacred communal slumber, points to a mortuary cult of staggering scale and obsessive focus. Among the scattered femurs and skulls, they discovered delicate, wide-eyed figurines that have come to be known as the sleeping ladies. These tiny terracotta women lie forever on their sides, their bodies unnaturally corpulent, their arms fat and folded as if frozen in an eternal dream. But not all the artifacts evoked gentle slumber. Some spoke of a chilling divergence in the human form. A limestone head shattered the conventional understanding of the temple builders. It depicted a being with an impossibly elongated, serpentine skull, a design that has no parallel in the natural world. For decades, the mainstream dismissed these as stylistic abstractions, artistic exaggerations of a priestly class wearing strange headdresses. That comfortable theory crumbled, however, when the biological evidence was forced out of the locked storerooms and into the light. The bones themselves told a different, more disturbing story. Among the thousands of skeletons, a significant percentage of the skulls were not carved in stone. They were actual bone. These skulls, belonging to both adults and children, lacked the sagittal suture, the central joint that usually fuses the plates of the human cranium. The craniums were not just artificially deformed through cradle boarding, a practice of cultural shaping. They displayed a fundamental biological anomaly in bone structure. The volume of these cranial cavities was nearly twice that of a modern human brain, housed in a skulls that sloped backward in a way that defies simple genetic mutation. To stand in the silent ossuary of the hypogeum is to ask a question that shakes the foundation of human ancestry. Who were the long skulls, and why were they so carefully entombed here? Some researchers have pointed to the global phenomenon of elongated skulls, from Paracas in Peru to the Caucasus Mountains, and whispered of a lost pre-cataclysmic race of priests or demigods. A darker hypothesis suggests these were not gods, but a distinct hominid species, a branch of humanity's tree that faded into extinction, leaving only these silent bone echoes. Yet, for all the wonder of the bones, it is the architectural acoustics that transform this archaeological site into a genuine physical enigma that can be felt in the chest. In the deepest, most sacred chamber of the hypogeum, there is a room carved with absolute geometric precision, known simply as the oracle room. It is a chamber of red ochre spirals, a swirling, hypnotic artwork that seems to pulse in the flickering light, drawing the eye into a vortex of ancient consciousness. When you stand in the exact center of this chamber and let out a low, guttural hum, something scientifically baffling occurs. The sound does not merely echo, it amplifies, it transforms, and it vibrates through the limestone at a very specific frequency of 110 hertz. This is not a random cave echo. The entire room is a meticulously engineered acoustic cavity designed to resonate at a tone that modern neuroscience has identified as profoundly altering to the human brain. When exposed to 110 hertz, the prefrontal cortex and language centers of the brain begin to switch off, abruptly reducing the brain's logic-based activity. Simultaneously, regions associated with emotional processing, dream states, and mystical experience a sudden, intense spike in activation. Imagine a chamber where a chanter, a shaman, or a priest could step into a precise spot of sound and have their rational mind shut down instantly, plunging them into a vivid, waking vision. Was this an ancient technology of consciousness, a device built not of steel and wires, but of geometry and rock, to conjure the gods from the dark? Where mainstream archaeology fumbles for a rational explanation, it points to a belief in the cult of the dead, a widespread, Neolithic practice of ancestor worship. In this view, the hypogeum was simply an elaborate tomb, a place where the living visited the sleeping bones of their elders to seek wisdom and maintain social order. The fatness of the sleeping ladies, they argue, represents the fertile abundance of the earth, a symbolic prayer for the resurrection of the body or the rebirth of the crops. The acoustics in this conventional reading are a happy accident, a massive, uninformed structural fluke that the priests merely exploited rather than designed. But the Labyrinth of Malta does not yield to such simple, comforting logic. The engineering required to create that frequency from living rock is far too precise to be a coincidence. To carve an antechamber that mimics the exact resonant frequency of a male human voice box requires a level of acoustic physics that fits no known Neolithic toolkit. Some archaeologists scanning further into the bedrock have speculated that the known 3 levels are nothing but a foyer for a deeper, sealed labyrinth. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have suggested the existence of sealed hollow cavities stretching far beyond the excavated chambers, possibly linking to other surface temples like Yajar Kim and Menajdra. Local whispers have long held that a submerged tunnel network connects the hypogeum to the sea, a legend that local fishermen use to explain the sudden disappearance of floodwaters in the area. To step into this space is to feel the maddening pull of incomplete data, where hard science begins to dissolve into the mist of esoteric possibility. If we look to Malta's megalithic surface temples for clues, we find the same obsessive alignment with celestial bodies and the same profound isolation from the rest of the Mediterranean world. These are not simple sun circles. They are complex calendars built in stone, designed to track the slow 18.6-year wobble of the moon's orbit, a precessional dance that takes decades to observe. The megalithic builders possessed a star knowledge so advanced that it forces us to ask whether we are the real primitives, stumbling in the footprint of a forgotten intellectual golden age. These surface temples share a unique architectural feature known as fat lady statues or baytiles, sometimes missing their heads, leaving only the massive abstracted body of a fertility goddess. A controversial theory links these headless statues directly to the elongated skulls below the earth. Were the heads of these statues originally carved not as humans, but as the long-skulled beings themselves? Perhaps the Maltese builders were not merely worshipping a generic mother goddess, but memorializing a specific, physically anomalous lineage that lived among them and demanded a home beneath the earth. There is a chilling hypothesis that the Hypogeum was not a tomb for all, but a sealed sanctuary for a distinct genetic strain, a priestly race of elongated skulls who rarely surfaced into the light. They may have retreated underground, not just in death, but in life, adapting to the constant temperature and the deep, echolocating darkness, communicating through the 110 hertz sound that disoriented Homo sapiens. We must confront the terrifying possibility that the chambers for the dead narrative is a fundamental misunderstanding. Perhaps they were chambers for the living, a vault for survival. This might explain why the discovery of the Hypogeum was so violently suppressed in its early days. The official narrative of the 1902 discovery is, in itself, a story of human frailty and fear. The chief archaeologist, Father Emmanuel Magri, a Jesuit priest, was the first man to meticulously excavate the site and meticulously record the elongated skulls and the mystical acoustics. It is the classic pattern of an inconvenient truth. The man who holds the deepest knowledge disappears, and the physical evidence is sanitized or locked away by the authorities that follow. For most of the 20th century, the National Museum of Malta refused to put the elongated skulls on display, hiding them in the back rooms of the collection, far from the curious eyes of the public. This act of hiding the evidence, of locking the bones in a vault while displaying the pretty pottery, forces us to examine the psychological toll this enigma takes on the human mind. The visitor who descends into the Hypogeum today is allowed only a brief, strictly controlled visit. Much of the complex is permanently sealed off, either for preservation or for a more ambiguous form of protection. You are not permitted to stand unsupervised in the oracle room. You are not allowed to linger in the deep silence for too long, as if the authorities fear the stone itself might still speak. The air feels thin down there, not from a lack of oxygen, but from the crushing weight of time. Every breath you take is a breath shared with the spectral residue of 7,000 souls. For those who believe that history is a solved puzzle, the Hypogeum is a devastating psychological blow. It is an anti-monument to our ignorance. We have constructed elaborate theories of cultural evolution on the surface, imagining that complexity only arose under the open sun with the invention of the wheel and the plow. Yet here, in total darkness, a people who never wrote a single word left behind a technological sphinx, a machine for altering consciousness and navigating the underworld. The search for answers leads countless obsessives to stare at the red spirals painted on the ceiling, seeking a pattern of swallowed symbols that might unlock the language of the long skulls. The spiral itself is the oldest symbol in human history, representing the journey inward, the descent into the labyrinth of the self, or perhaps the astral journey of the soul. Did the Maltese priests use this exact shape, coupled with the 110 hertz vibration, as a launch pad for an out-of-body journey through the grid of the underworld? Mainstream science refuses to touch the question of consciousness technology, calling it pseudo-archaeology, a label used to dismiss evidence that does not fit the established paradigm. Yet the physical structure of the oracle room remains defiant and measurable. It is not a myth. It is a calibrated, resonant tool that literally lights up the emotional brain and shuts down the ego. We tell ourselves that time reveals all things. But as you look upon the precise tool-marked limestone of Malta, you realize that time is a great eraser, not a great illuminator. Time has swallowed the flesh, burned the ritual robes, and silenced the chants, leaving us only the bare mineral skeleton of a miracle. The enduring obsession with the hypogeum is not just about the past. It is a mirror held up to our own species' profound anxiety about the limits of our perception. We are terrified of the idea that a civilization could reach such heights of sophistication and then completely vanish, leaving only a whisper in the dark. If a society of star mapping, brain stilling, long-skulled priests could dissolve into the rock, what does that say about the permanence of our own digital monuments? Perhaps the deepest secret of the Maltese underground is not the identity of the worshippers, but the nature of what they were worshipping. Was it death? Was it life? Or was it the threshold between the two? The hypogeum functions as a liminal space, a gateway that is neither purely physical nor purely spiritual, freezing the observer in a state of suspended wonder. As the heavy doors close behind you and you ascend back into the blinding Mediterranean sun, the memory of the oracle room vibrates in your bones like a ghost of a frequency you cannot quite hear. You leave the underground temple knowing that you have stood inside a question mark carved from the very bedrock of the planet. A question that predates the pharaohs and confuses the modern mind. The silent stone face of the long skull stares back from the museum's private archives, asking for a recognition we are not yet evolved enough to give. The theories will continue to clash. The archaeologists will call it a tomb, the mystics will call it a portal, and the geneticists will dispute the strange DNA that has yet to be thoroughly mapped. But the stone remembers. The red spirals still spin in the darkness, untouched by the light of logical explanation, guarding the silence of a forgotten breed. The hypogeum of Ħal Saflieni remains the ultimate great work of an anonymous architect, a nameless priest, and a people who seemingly chose the embrace of the deep earth over the open sky. We are left staring into the abyss of prehistory, tracing the geometric perfection of the oracle room with our eyes, feeling the faint, ghostly pressure of a sound designed to shut down the thinking mind. The labyrinth does not offer a way out, only a way deeper in an infinite regression into the mystery of a stone labyrinth built for beings with heads shaped like serpents. And perhaps that is the final, haunting lesson of the underground temples. Some doors are not meant to be opened with a key, but with a frequency we have forgotten how to sing. So the question lingers in the warm, dark air of Malta's ancient core, echoing across 5,000 years of devastating silence. Who truly worshipped below the earth? And why, in the deepest chamber of the world, did they need to build a machine that could make a man forget he was alive?